United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're starting on the special board meeting. And at this time, I'll ask if there's any public comment on the matters that are listed on the agenda. Yes. You already yes. I ask that you please stand and come to the podium and address them. I think there's a sign-in paper there. And very well. Give us your name and address.
My name is Ryan DeLong. I'm a graduate of Easton High School, currently residing in Chicago, Illinois, but hope to be relocated here by spring of 2014 for a recent job transfer. I would like to comment on the coaching selection process that has been going on for the last month or two, specifically the selection of Ben Childs, which is on the agenda tonight, and more specifically, what made him stand out as a candidate versus some of the others. As many may know, it came down to two candidates, Ben Childs and Eric Jacobs, who some of you may have recalled was a former varsity girls coach here at Easton High School, and more recently, a Del Val varsity head coach. Would anybody like to address what separated Mr. Childs from Mr. Jacobs?
You want to say something positive?
This is all he's looking for the board.
Oh, comment on
What did we see?
No, I can't do that. We can't give you the analysis of the one candidate versus the other. It's just not done. This respects the confidentiality those candidates had in the process.
I understand that. Mr. Reinhardt had communicated to the board via email that it came down to a difference in philosophies, and that very well may be.
If you want to talk about philosophy, I guess that's okay.
Another matter that seemed to be addressed was also the desire to have someone who is currently teaching within a school district, which is certainly a valid concern, although that wasn't a requirement for the job at the time. Would you like to speak about either the philosophies or how you came to this decision, where you had two coaches that you brought to a final interview, one with no head coaching experience at all, one who had formerly been the assistant of the other coach who had 11 years of head coaching experience, and we're going to label it as a difference in philosophies as for the reason we selected one over the other? I mean, clearly there had to have been a hard, major difference that stood out in those philosophies.
Yes, but there was some major differences, but I wouldn't feel comfortable sitting here and talking about those with you in a public meeting. That would be totally unfair to both gentlemen, and I think a tremendous violation of the trust that's inherent in an interview process that goes for any of the jobs in the school system. I wouldn't want any potential candidates to think that any remarks or any information that they give to us during an interview process is going to be subject for public debate like that. I think I'm really uncomfortable with that.
Okay, Mr. Reinhardt, I understand that.
I would also urge you to come and see me personally. I can share with you my personal observations, and I won't represent the opinions of others, but you know, you did share with us your concerns. I don't know where you got your information from, because some of the things that you had indicated were very well, I'm not sure where you got your facts and where you got your opinions from, but you characterized the process in a very unfair manner, not knowing what the process was.
Well, without making the accusations, I said, let's make sure that everyone on this board is aware of the facts of all these several coaches that have been looked at here. Specifically, one of the coaches, the coach selected, has a very known, close and personal relationship with the athletic department. Several key individuals in the athletic department are close, personal, characterize them as drinking buddies, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I would strongly object to that. I would strongly object to you coming here and insinuating that people that are drinking buddies here that are employed by us. I mean, that's just totally not fair.
Okay.
That's really a bad
Let's
use of
call
words.
it, well, we can't deny the fact that there are personal relationships, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong to say that a personal friend of a ranking individual or somebody in the process he may be the deserving individual for that job. It doesn't change the fact that he is a personal friend. So you would have to look elsewhere and go, okay, but he has all these great credentials that clearly separated him apart from the other candidate.
Our final
but
two candidates had personal relationships with a lot of people. They are both very well known, I think, in the Easton athletic circles. They were both outstanding athletes, and they were both of outstanding character. So I'm not sure where you draw a line or split the hairs between the two. But the process, I sat in on the process from beginning to end. And I can tell you, as a witness and a participant, that everything was above board and that everyone had an opportunity to express their opinion and make a choice. And I can also tell you that people on this board were apprised of what that committee was doing first time around, and some of these people sat on the committee the second time around. So everyone knew what was going on from the very start. The implication or the insinuation that there might have been favoritism here could have gone in two different directions, because perhaps I think they might have been the only two former Easton athletes. But that insinuation could go in either direction, because they were both men of great character and great and success in athletics. So I'm not sure.
So
this committee made a choice.
You alluded that it was a very close decision.
Yes.
As you said, they both have fantastic qualities.
Yes.
It's my understanding that the final round of interviews was approximately 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And it took about another week to 10 days to notify the candidates of the results.
Right. What's wrong with that?
Unanimous decision, but it took a week later to
Well,
find it.
see, once again, Mr. DeLong, I think what you need to do is come in and talk to me about what the process entailed and why that happened.
Okay.
The only reason why there was a delay is because we targeted this. We were not sure we were going to have a special board meeting at this time. And I think the board president can speak to that. We weren't going to have he wasn't sure we were going to have a special board meeting, and we didn't want the information to leak out, if you will, prior to the board having the final okay. Because sometimes, in certain circumstances, that can cause embarrassment for candidates and for boards, and we don't want that to happen. So we were it was made very clear to all of us that we wanted to make sure that this selection process had integrity and that we weren't going to do anything that was going to embarrass either candidate.
And Mr. Long, I will address that one. When we met and that interview process concluded and everything, first thing was to notify the board members. The other piece that was going on were some of the other issues on tonight's special agenda. When we were having it, we were back and forth, and we also have to have notice for the papers and everything else. There's a timeline when you do that. And we, at that point, had various dates when we would be holding that. It was possibly going to be the 1st or the 2nd of October, but things didn't work out. So then the next opportunities were going to be the 7th or the 8th. Well, because certain other things didn't work out, it ended up being tonight. We weren't going to go any later than tonight. So that's where the decision was made to hold that, and then apprise in between the rest of the board of what was going on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fannell. And those of you who had responded, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else this evening? Okay, moving on with the agenda. As we said, this was a special meeting. We had multiple items to put on the agenda. And I'm going to take them in two groups. One is the first is the personnel matters, the election and the salary increment. And if we can have a motion for the personnel matters.
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions?
Just one comment. I want to assure Mr. DeLong that his emails were read, at least by this person, and actually caused me to question once again, which I did tonight. So I can assure you that you were heard, and I appreciate your input.
Any other comments?
I was wondering,
Nope. Yeah, at this point, board's in session, yes. Any other questions on the board? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
We have one recorded. Thank you. Under contracts, I will take them individually. The first one is with, I will call it simply the bus drivers, Teamsters Local 778. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Oh, I will correct that. 773, person making the motion is okay with that?
Correct, 773.
Up at the top, it's 77. Okay, 773. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? The second one is for the Act 93, and this is in the interims, understanding as we're working and trying to get the final wording down and everything to the final agreement, and hopefully we have that for the end of October meeting. Can we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments?
Yes.
Please.
This interim agreement will last until we pass the final agreement?
Yes,
If we don't pass the final agreement, this stays in place
only until for the 1 year period, and that's
for
it.
a 1 year period?
Yep.
All right. Thank
So
you.
that's why we want to get it here before the end of October.
So it can go from now until the end of October, or from now until a year from now?
It could, but we want to try to get it done.
All right. I
And it's retroactive, so,
just want to make sure you understand what we're
yeah.
voting on.
It's not a year from now.
July
June
1st,
30th.
yeah,
Right.
July 1st, June 30th.
Understood.
Other questions?
Next time.
Yes, sir.
Comment, not, I guess, more than a question. I'm going to vote no on this motion, and I want to just give a bit of explanation why. I am all for excellence in education, and I do not see that giving a flat salary increase, irrespective of performance, contributes to excellence in education. I believe that a flat 2% sells short many of the excellent administrators and workers in Act 93. And it's because they're lumped in with people who perhaps don't deserve an increase. I would like to see merit-based increases, and especially merit-based increases based on student achievement. Many of the administrators have demonstrable records based on state testing in their schools, where there's been not only achievement but growth. Others do not. That's the sole reason why I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Should you take them independently then, A then B?
I did.
Okay,
We just approved A,
okay.
so we're down to B.
Sorry.
No problem. We have a motion and a second there. All those in favor of B?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
No.
Have 2 noes. Terry and Bob, is that correct? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a 5-2 vote. It will carry. At this point, you know, because we're going to start off, hang on 1 second, please. We're going to start off here for any other comments. Yeah. Oh, no, we don't. I'm sorry. So it's not down to here. If there's any other comments, open comments for anybody, at this point is the time to come to the podium and you can make those comments. Anybody want to address those? You will have a second opportunity at the end of the committee meeting. Hearing none, can I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion second, thank you. We're adjourned. Moving on. Call to order. We've already done the Pledge of Allegiance. We have the roll recorded. We're into academics. Janet and Bill.
Okay, thank you, President Fainall. We have several items on the Academics Committee agenda this evening, starting with Mr. Steckel, providing an update on K-6.
And if, so please, the board, each academics and ed meeting, I would like to have just a small portion. You'll get a briefing that will come out in the board minutes or the board information that is shared with you electronically. And my position would be basically just to reiterate a few things that you may have read prior to the meeting and maybe highlight a few things. But it wouldn't be anything in depth. I just want to make you aware of what we've been doing at K-6, not a formal presentation.
Sure.
So if that's okay. Just a couple highlights. Keystone Opportunity Grant. You are aware that we have that. I just want to give you an update. Working with the Teacher Association, as well as a number of teachers, we have teachers that will be doing some professional development on their own time. It'll be done after hours. It's done electronically. We're doing things with Blackboard and different kinds of electronic venues to have teachers attend some professional development, just trying something a little bit different. The teacher will be compensated for the time that they spend on their own. Title I, Title II, and Title III, a number of us continue to look at those grants and the funds and how they are used, hoping to be fiscally responsible and making sure that some things that maybe at one point a few years ago, based on stimulus funds or some other piece of money, that those contracts aren't just going on and on and on, that somebody actually does review them and make sure that we are continuing to, if we are in fact using the things with Title I, Title II, and Title III funds, that they just don't happen to go on and on without evaluating them.
These are federal dollars, correct?
That's correct.
Are these going to be affected by the situation we're in now politically? And because educationally, since the sequestration,
Yes.
there has been cuts in education. Now, obviously, we have a hold on the government, which doesn't want to do anything to correct anything at this point in time. So there's a concern now with educational dollars from federal funding. Now, is this going to be curtailed, or what have we heard as a school district in reference to this?
Mike, if you want, I have not.
Nothing,
I have
Yeah.
not received anything that to say that any Title I, II, III funds have been altered based on current political issues.
nothing yet, but it is on everyone's radar, wait and see, and especially in light of the current events. So,
Have any monies for the current school year under these title funds already been given to the district?
yeah, we receive monthly.
Okay, so,
We haven't seen any reduction in the monthly,
Okay.
allotment, so
Right.
we're still on track.
Okay.
And the way in which this is done, since it's done monthly, and we are making, relatively speaking, daily decisions, I think we can alter what we're doing, and in the event that the funds are altered.
It's extremely concerning at this point in time.
I understand, because we don't want to take them on as a district if we're unable to fund it through federal dollars. And we're pretty cognizant of that and make sure that that does not become a district having to deal with that financially. And just some math and literacy updates. Had a meeting with Mrs. Matthews. We're certainly taking a critical look at what we're doing K-4, actually K-6 in the area of literacy and math. And met with a number of interventionists today because we are making sure that during professional development time that we're actually seeing the results of what we're doing with the teachers. And most recently, they've been meeting at 8:05 during professional development time and putting some rubrics together. And a rubric basically will allow the teacher to accurately grade a student on a level of 1 through 4 at the end of each marking period. So they have some pretty rather daunting task in front of them, and our goal is to have that completed by the end of the first marking period. And Ms. Matthews and I will continue our conversation about our core program, K through 6. That's all for this evening.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Steckel. I notice that you have the enrollment information also, that we need to discuss it, just that it is there. And
Yes. And
does anybody have any?
Mr. Reinhardt,
thing to say?
did that go out on Friday? Was that shared? Electronically, okay. The Principals are aware of the increased enrollment. It's constantly being monitored. It's monitored once a week. We go
Okay.
through the numbers, and obviously the number 25 in a classroom is one of those that kind of sends up a red flag.
Thank you, Mr. Steckel. Ms. DeVitro, update on academics in 7 through 12?
Should I do that? I'm just gonna
If
do
you'd
the
like.
first.
Sure.
I'll just do a quick overview before I go into the PowerPoint, which is an update on some of the questions that were asked at a previous board meeting in July about our math, at what we're doing with math at the high school. As far as the high school is concerned, I meet on a weekly basis with the department coordinators, and we're really looking at the curriculum, taking a hard look at our curriculum and aligning it, making sure that it's aligned to the Common Core and the Keystone exams, and looking at our common assessments, and that's going to take quite a process, quite some time. It's not overnight, but Mike Cup has actually mapped out for each professional development date to have the departments meet and look at that. So we are hopefully, by the end of this school year, we're much more aligned to Common Core and Keystones to prepare our students for the test. Same thing at the 7-8 building. We're continuing with depth of knowledge and rigor and creating our common assessments throughout the 7th and 8th grade curriculum in all areas. So that's pretty much an update, which Bob did the K to 6. I just wanted to give you a quick overview on that. So we meet weekly, and I meet weekly with the principals as well to discuss that. Okay. What I'd like to do now is provide a quick overview of where we're at with the high school math questions that were previously asked at, I think it was the July board meeting, and I was waiting with, and working with Barry Cortez to get these answers, because it does take time to extrapolate that data. So the first question, how many students are taking advantage of the ability to take 2 math courses in a single year? Increase or decrease in the number of students who failed math since the high school schedule changed from a traditional schedule to a flexible schedule? And then the comparison of the 2010-11, 11-12, and 12-13 SAT scores. Okay, so students taking 2 math courses in a single year. And this information, again, is not, up to the last second, because we took a snapshot September 13th. That's when I started working with Mr. Cortez on this. He was able to have time to take this information out of Power School. 9th grade students, there are 26 students out of 752 students total in that grade that are taking 2 math courses in a single year, and we can do that because of the block scheduling. 1 semester, 1 math, a 2nd semester, a 2nd math. 10th grade, 43 students out of 629, 11th, 42 students out of 639 students, and 12th grade, 26 students out of 614. We have a total of 137 students who are currently taking 2 math courses in a single year, but that does not yet include our students taking a full year of math course. And oftentimes you're going to see these are our upper level students. So AP Calculus, we have 58 students taking AP, and that's all year. Calculus 3, there are 9 students. AP to Statistics, 29. Pre-Algebra and Algebra 1, 97. And that's a full year of math. So total, out of 2,466 students, we have 330 students that are taking math for a full year. Any questions about that? Okay. I know this is small. There's a lot of courses that we offer at the high school, but I wanted you to take at the slide, if you look at the slide on the left, that's the 11-12 school year. The slide on the right is the 12-13 school year. And this chart is showing us the amount of students who are taking each of those math courses and the actual percentage grade that they are receiving. And if you look, I don't want to go through each one, but overall, just so you know, from traditional to block, it shows an increase in our passing rate and our percentages. Not in every single one, but overall you can see that there is an increase which is positive. Statistically, is it greatly significant? I'm not sure I can say that, but overall, you can see it by the numbers that our percentages are increasing with the students passing and doing a little bit better than the previous year. Algebra 1 at the bottom, I highlighted that, and Algebra 1B, that is not offered, and Calculus 3 is offered. So that, I just wanted to show the difference. That wasn't offered the previous year, Calculus 3. So, the numbers look positive. That's my overall assessment of that. Okay. SAT scores. I wanted to go back 3 years and take a look at what we've done through, for the past 3 years, and I provided the Easton Area High School scores as well as Pennsylvania mean scores, which is the center block, and then the national mean scores. And when you look at that with reading, math, and writing, we're really pretty close to, if not above or on the mark of Pennsylvania mean scores and national mean scores. I did look into the scores. For example, if you take a look at, let me see here, statistically significant about the raw scales and comparing them. For example, if you have a score of 480 and the state has a score of 500, the difference of that is only one question. So like a score of 480 to a 500 really isn't that much of a difference. It's a difference of answering one question right or wrong. So overall, I think we do fairly well. Okay. And in closing, the focus tonight, of course, is on the math, because that was these were the questions that were asked. But we're continuously analyzing data for all areas: discipline, attendance, literacy, problem solving, and critical thinking, and the use of technology. And again, I know I presented this evening on math at the high school, but our ultimate goal is to meet the diverse needs of all Easton Area High School students. So that sums up that presentation. I wasn't sure if you had any questions. I know you had this in advance, and you might have a few questions for me, or in the future. Yes, sir.
Can you tell me, Ms. DeVitrio, what's the difference between Algebra 1 and 1B?
Yeah, Algebra 1, and Mike, I know you just came in. The difference between Algebra 1,
Very timely.
good timing, and 1B. If I'm not mistaken, Algebra 1 is the first course, and then Algebra B is the second course that they need to have more assistance. So it would be one semester of Algebra 1, and then if they're still not proficient, correct, Mike, then they go into the Algebra 1B to provide them more, remediation and assistance.
And the Keystone exam is targeted towards Algebra 1?
That is correct. Algebra 1, biology, and literature, yeah.
Are you surprised then with the drop-off in the passing scores, given the intensity that you have now looked at Algebra 1 for Keystone?
Am I surprised? Well, it's the first year we gave the Keystone test, so I don't want to say I'm shocked. The students have not seen that type of a test before. It was the PSSA test. So to be fair to our students, no, I'm not surprised. I'm hoping that the percentages will increase. And Mike, you can, chime in if you want at this time, but I believe that's where what our thought is. It's the first time they've seen that test.
But the passing score is the in-class pass, not the test, right?
This is in class, yes, sir. This is what you're looking at. Are you talking about
the data you presented, line 1. Passing in 2011, if I'm reading it right, says that almost 80% passed, and 12, almost 76%.
And some of that's a direct correlation, Dr. Muscat, is to the fact that we had to increase the rigor in that course in order for it to meet the same standard as the Keystone exams. So when you look at that Algebra 1, the average grade in the class, still at a 68.5 in that on-level class, moving across that average grade, it slightly dipped for that total of students involved. And so did the percentage, the passing score actually went to a 76, because there has been some adjustments made to the curriculum and understanding what Ms. DeVitrio stated about the rigor of that particular assessment. And the fact that it is much more difficult sort of then what was done on the PSSA math in terms of the types of questions. It's no more higher of a math, but the types of understanding that students need to know and be able to do on that assessment has increased in great rigor. And that's why across the state, those test scores have been driven down across the board. It's not just a phenomenon in Eastern High School, it's across the state of Pennsylvania that those numbers have declined. But this data that you're looking at here is specific to our students' performance in our courses.
Yes.
And so I think the other piece of the Algebra 1A and 1B is a few years back in preparation for the Keystone's first time around in 2011, because then we skipped a year in 2012, is that we were trying to build that curriculum to match those anchors so that our lowest level of math students, so to speak, would have pre-algebra, Algebra 1A, and Algebra 1B. It would basically be 3 semesters or 3 years kind of condensed of math. So in our old schedule, it was a double block every day for a full year. In the new schedule, it's every day for a full year. And then the 1B course now simply becomes Algebra 1. So they'll take pre-algebra, Algebra 1A, and they'll take the Algebra 1 course that third semester, which would be their first semester of their sophomore years, and therefore they'll be better prepared to take this assessment. The real issue is the fact that they come to us at the high school not having pre-algebra in grade 8. So we have to make up for some of that deficit when they arrive in our buildings. The students you're looking at here for Algebra 1 have taken pre-algebra in grade 8 and are taking Algebra 1 in our building. And they're the group right now that's still struggling with that curriculum, so to speak. And that's why I think Ms. Demetrio mentioned the supports that we have in place for those struggling kids during our Rover Block intervention time.
Does that help clarify?
Not really, but
I tried.
if your rigor increases further,
It
should
is.
we expect then the passing scores to continue to drop?
No. No, we should not. In fact, that's what we're working on with the coordinators. Our math coordinator today specifically said that the course is harder because the test is obviously more difficult and the rigor is there. And that's what our math teachers are working on, aligning that curriculum to the more rigorous standards of the Keystone. So I'm hoping that now, if we have that alignment, then the students will perform better on the test. Because this was the first year of that test. Now, hopefully, they take it and they'll be
makes
better
sense.
prepared.
Thank
Is
you.
that okay?
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Any other questions
Yeah.
about that? Yes.
We have Algebra 1, Algebra 1B, CP Algebra 1. And a student has to take a Keystone exam
Yep.
after Algebra 1.
They do.
Okay, so whether I'm in Algebra 1, 1B, or CP, I'm still going to take that Keystone, which is an algebra. How closely interrelated is that Keystone to, I guess, the methodology of those 3 areas? Because obviously we have a difference of skill-based from an Algebra 1 to a CP Algebra 1. I mean, that's a reality.
It is.
We're trying to support kids at the Algebra 1 level. Then we get this Keystone of, I don't know, how, that to me, that interests me, Michael.
It's almost like a minimum course
Okay.
of study.
Okay.
So the Algebra 1 curriculum is written at the level for students to achieve proficiency on the Keystone exam. So all students taking Algebra 1 and all students will. The Algebra 1B no longer will exist. Doesn't exist this year anymore.
Okay.
All kids will take Algebra 1 at the conclusion of Algebra 1. They will take the Keystone exam. Even the pre-Algebra 1 kids will take Algebra 1. That's when they will take the Keystone exam. The Algebra 1 course is written to mirror what the Module 1 and Module 2 of the Keystone are. The CP Algebra course is a bump up.
It
Yes.
goes deeper.
So the rigor is intensified, and that's what Ms. Demetrio was leading to about looking at the department and saying, if the course requirement is Algebra 1, then CP needs to be above that in terms of the rigor. And the honors obviously is above that, but that honors typically takes place in grade 8 and
Yes.
not
Right.
grade 9. And so there's a minimum course, which is really the algebra. I hate to use that terminology, but it's more closely aligned to the assessment. And then the CP has to be an increased rigor even above what the Keystone requirement is.
Because obviously not all of our kids can take that CP
Right,
course and
exactly.
pass, but we want to make sure the basic algebra class is enough to make sure that they pass that Keystone to be proficient. And then we have our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions in place with our Rover Block, that those students over the summer might looked at their benchmark scores, and they've been placed in that intervention to make gains, hopefully, and score proficient. Good questions.
And our hope, not that I'm part of this, but I would love to chime in. And our hope is what we're finding K to 4 and the PA core is increased academic rigor. So you have a keystone, and those students taking it for the first time, it's a different type of assessment. The things that the students have to do now is not maybe just manipulating numbers, but is actually applying those things. So that the academic rigor in the assessment is different. So when I look at a second grade standard, and I'm working with a group of teachers, which is doing that today, we're looking at, okay, we obviously have to change the way in which we're teaching, so pedagogy needs to change. We obviously have to change the way we're assessing, because now it needs to be a little more rigorous. Well, hopefully, maybe by the time they get to the high school, that assessment will change. But the idea is more academic rigor. So we're attempting to do that K to 6 so that we can prepare students in high school, so that we see an increase in the scores and not a decrease.
Does that help? Any other questions for that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Vitro, for that. Okay, we're now on letter C. Mr. Vitro and Mr. Steckel.
It's okay, Ms. Matthews, I'll take that and just make some comments with reference to the, did everyone see the soft release in comparison to the hard release of the school performance profile data in your local press, or did you get to see the numbers? They were released this weekend, and I don't really want to reiterate the numbers, but what I would love to do is be able just to give an indication that, I mean, I can give you the numbers if you'd like to hear them. Mr. Reinhardt? Okay. It's basically out of 100. Cheston, in overall, their performance profile, the score was 71.8, Forks 88.6, March 75, Palmer 90.4, Paxinosa 74.5, Shawnee was 87.2, Tracy 84, the middle school 5.6, 65.3, 78 middle school
was 81.6.
and the one that has not been released is the high school data, and that's because the information that was put into the formula to determine that number is not accurate. So if you don't mind, Ms. Matthews, I just want to talk a little bit about the way that score is derived.
Please do.
There is a formula. I'm going to call on some of those high school students to solve the way in which this formula was actually to determine how it was factored in. But skip briefly. There are indicators of achievement, and at the elementary level, basically they would take, the people that did the formula, they would look at the percent proficient or advanced PSSAs in math, reading, and science. And then in grade 3 reading, there was also a percent of proficient advanced on PSSAs. So it's basically advanced proficient in PSSAs in grades 3 and 4 at the elementary level, at least in our elementary schools. Then there were these indicators of academic growth. Have you ever heard people talk about PVAS? There's PVAS data, PVAAS data out there. Elementary level, there's a formula, and you get a number for meeting the annual academic growth. Dr. Moskaitis, you talked about growth, and we are measured. Did a student, when he started school that grade and ended that grade, did he make at least 1 year's growth? So each school is given a score based on the amount of growth in grades 3 and 4 in the area of math, reading, and grade 4 science. Then there are other academic indicators. They take attendance rate. How was your attendance rate? If it was good, you get a certain percentage or a score. And then there's extra credit at the elementary level. You get extra points. That's the percent of students on PSSAs that scored advanced in math, reading, and science. There is a formula that all of these numbers go into, and then what comes out of it is your final score. So there are a multitude of things. It's growth in the course of a year, plus how well your students do on your PSSAs. And then at middle school, the formula is a little bit more advanced. And when you get to the high school, the formula includes many things. And the issue that we had is the data that had been shared, and Ms. DeVitro, don't want to step on your toes, but the data that had been shared had been determined based on looking at the scores on PSSAs. The information was not accurate being shared. So if inaccurate information is put into the formula, you're going to get inaccurate information at the other end. That's why, if you looked at the release, a number of schools had NA, and in most cases they were NA at their high school level, because there needs to be a tweak to the formula. And that's where we are with that release of data.
Yeah. Thank you for your continued questioning of the state to get this information out correctly. I know it's been frustrating for those of you trying to get that information and getting nowhere. I do have a question, Mr. Steckel, you may know. Are any of those factors weighted?
Yes, they all are.
They're all weighted?
There are a number of point values. There's a factor value for each one of those.
Okay.
And I mean, I can share that with you and you can see what it looks like. But
Okay.
it is weighted.
All right, so what's considered, what are we going with now with this new
Well,
assessment form? Or is there a number, a cut point at which a school is deemed making it adequate?
do you want to?
I was just going to say, I think that most of us would lean towards 70 to 75% is the place where those in the know have, and the acting secretary of ed has kind of focused her attention. We're not sure where she came up with that or where anybody came up with that, but so we're looking at that as the score for some reason that becomes a determination factor there of whether you're in and then there's several labels. Is that the right word? Labels that are assigned to schools. Angie, do you have something there?
Well, I have a breakdown of the 100%. Is that what are you interested in hearing?
Well, I don't know if everybody wants to hear that now, but it's something I would want to know.
Well, I can do it very quickly. Indicators of academic performance is 40% if you're for advanced proficient. It counts as 40% out of 100. And then there's indicators of closing the achievement gap for all students. That counts as 5% of the 100. Indicators of closing the achievement gap for historically underperforming students. That counts as 5%. Indicators of academic growth, which is your PVOS. Have our children made growth over a year's time? That's 40%. Other academic indicators, which a lot of it is accounted towards the high school, cohort graduation rate, promotion rate, attendance rate, advanced placement, international baccalaureate or college credit, PSAT plan participation. That's 10%. And then finally, extra credit for advanced achievement is up, you can earn up to 7 points. That's your total of 100. It's very complicated.
It will also play a factor in the teacher's performance evaluation as well as the principal's performance evaluation in future years.
Yeah, so you can see the difficulty that we're all going to have in determining just what those scores represent.
Exactly.
I mean, unless you really drill down into that number and look at all those contributing factors, you really aren't going to understand. I mean, the number itself doesn't say a lot. And when you compare it to what we've been thinking about in the past with AYP and Safe Harbor and all those other labels that came out, this may be an easier way for us to get an assessment of the general function of a school, of a teacher, of a principal, of a superintendent, but it's still very hard to determine whether or not this is really the thing that we're looking for in terms of evaluating schools. It really is. It's certainly more complicated. And I will say that, you know, it does take a larger, more and a broader look at how schools are functioning, and that in and of itself is a tremendous step in the right direction, because in the past, you know, it was based on one test. At least here, there are other factors being contributed, and that is a huge step in the right direction. We're pleased with that, because You may have schools where kids are, you have a population of students who are in, let's say, 3rd grade, and they test out at a 2nd grade level on a standardized test, when indeed, if you look at that and you examine each one, you may find that those students at that level actually in 1 year might have gained 1.5 years or so, 2 years of growth, but it's not measured by the test. This is a little bit more accurate and fair to all, especially kids.
Yes.
So that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
As soon as we know what that high school number is going to be, we'll let you know. You may have further questions down the line too. Yes, Bob.
So this is a new system,
Brand
this
new.
year, right? So I think one of the risks or dangers is a parent, the public, sees just a number in the paper, and they go, wow. Is it possible to provide some context by using that same formula and showing what the last 3 or 5 years for a given school would be, given that same system? Because I think that might be rather important when you make a change.
You can compare the PSSA data. My only concern is that we have the PSSA data and then we switch to the Keystone. Is that comparing apples to apples?
But the number of factors, you're getting a single score for a school. And what I'm saying is if this system is now factors A, B, C, D, E, and F, use those same A through F on past, go back,
maybe that's the way it should be reported.
back test your data.
Yeah.
So you can show, is this a big change, a little change, no change?
We could go back a few years. PVOS would have only collected the data. I'd have to go back maybe 3-4 years. I'd have to look. But yeah,
It might just be helpful in communicating to the public and to parents.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
And I can just admit, I know the high school scores have not come out yet, but I can tell you, Mike and I have probably for the past 2 weeks, about 3 to 4 hours a day we have spent trying to figure out. It's very consuming. And that, it is what it is, because if it was not correct and we were trying to figure it out, and multiple emails back and forth to the state without any real answers. So that's why I asked to have the data suppressed, because I didn't want that incorrect number going out, neither did Mike. But when we look at the overall Algebra 1 biology and literacy test scores, we actually, for all of our testers, we score above the average for the state. I'm not saying it's off the charts, but I thought that was positive for the first time that we took the Keystone test. I don't know if, Mike, you have anything else to say, but I think we did, fairly well overall. I'm not saying it's, in the 90th percentile. I'm not sure what it'll be, but I did at least get a chance to look at it.
So all the way around, it's a confusing jump out of the box here, but coming from PDE, that's not a surprise, right?
They reported 4 students, and our senior class was reported as having 4 students. We have 630.
Close.
And close, yeah. So I put that change in twice, and it's not reflected, but hopefully it will be, and Mike and I have to go through the PVOS data and correct that information, because the students weren't bubbling correctly, and it just wasn't. The rollout the first time has some glitches, so hopefully that will be fixed.
I think you're on the right track, though, because if you go back to the PSSAs and you look at a math component, they have to know a little bit of more than just algebra. And you may not have that preparation by that junior year to have all those components. And you may not have the skills to do that. But zeroing in on an Algebra 1, whether it's a little bit higher or supportive Algebra 1,
That's right.
I think you're on the right track.
That's what we're doing curriculum-wise.
And I also think they're categorizing students different because at one time, I could fall into a variety of categories and hurt 3 or 4 areas on the PSSAs. Now I think it's just categorized as one.
And that's helpful.
And that's a huge change.
Big difference.
So some of these things are falling into place, and when you look at it logically, you think, okay, I'm taking algebra, at the end, I take an exam. Wow, brilliant, state, getting better. I guess the No Child Left Behind with perfection didn't quite make it.
So that's the State of the Union.
Yes, it is, quite literally, the State of the Union. Okay.
Okay, who's next?
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're on letter D, Read 180. Update and proposal for in-class support.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to briefly share with you some of the data that we're seeing with our Read 180 and System 44 programs. These are two of the reading intervention programs that we're using across the district from grade 5 through 12 for our students through our RTII model that need a little bit more support in reading. So just to briefly go over some of the data that we're seeing, just to highlight, 50% of our students that are taking Read 180 are demonstrating at least 1 year's growth on the SRI. The SRI is the test that is given through the Read 180 software program. And 39% of our students are demonstrating at least 2 years of reading growth. So I think that that's really important to see because we're seeing some really great gains with the students that are taking the Read 180 class. In System 44, we're utilizing solely for our ESL population at this time, but we're seeing that 22% of our students are demonstrating at least 1 year's growth, and 69% of our students are demonstrating at least 1 year's growth on their fluency. And that's what the System 44 program targets. It targets fluency. So the next slide shows just a snapshot, and it may be difficult to see on the screen, but if you have it in front of you, you're able to see our top 10 students that have taken Read 180 over the course of the 12-13 school year, and the growth that they've shown as individual students, obviously not who they are, but listed as student 1 through 10. We're seeing some fantastic growth with some of our students, gaining at least 3 to 4 years of growth in 1 year, 1 year's time taking Read 180. So I think that's really important to highlight as well. The next slide shows us the mean Lexile gains by site. So the first bar you'll see represents Eastern Area High School, the mean Lexile being 96. What that means is that at our high school level, a gain of 50 Lexile points would be equivalent to 1 grade level's growth. So with our students seeing a mean of 96, we're seeing that the students that are at Eastern Area High School taking Read 180 are seeing almost 2 grade levels of growth in their time in the course. At the middle school, the mean Lexile growth is 77. And at a middle school level, a gain of 70 Lexile points would be equivalent to 1 year's growth. So we're seeing with our middle school students about 1 year of growth in the time that they're taking the Read 180 course. This next slide just shows this number of students at the beginning of the course to the end, the decrease in the students that are testing at a below basic and basic level, and an increase of students that are testing at a proficient and advanced level. And then to jump into System 44, again, this is solely for our ESL students. The System 44 focuses on the foundational reading and phonics and fluency for our most challenged readers. So we're seeing a decrease in the students that are testing at below basic, and then an increase in the students that are testing at basic, proficient, and then no students were testing at advanced in either the pre or post test that took the System 44 course, but still a decrease and an increase in the areas that we wanted to see. So I just wanted to briefly share with you that data. This Read 180 program is something that and System 44 are something that we've utilized in our district for about 6 years now. I think we started that in 2007. And it is something that we've been very committed to, and we are continuing to see the results. So I wanted to be able to share that out with the board. and also request for us to continue the in-class support that we've been providing for the past 6 years of the program. We've been contracting with Scholastic, who has developed the Read 180 program, and they provide to us in-class support and coaching for each of the instructors, each of our teachers that are delivering this program. This is done on a quarterly basis, so that the coach would spend 2 days each quarter, so for a total of 8 days, and they would be able to work with each of our teachers then on a quarterly basis to ensure that we have program fidelity. The System 44 and Read 180 programs are both a scripted program, so it's very important that the instructors that are providing this or delivering this program to our students adhere to it in order to see the greatest results. And also with the data system that accompanies the program, the in-class support really trains the instructor to be able to drill down in the data to make sure that the students are being provided with the individualized instruction that they need through the Read 180 program. So we wanted to be able to continue this coaching. Again, this coaching is something that we do annually, but we want to pass this along and request that we are able to continue this, and we would be utilizing Title II funds in order to do that. In light of Mr. Ryder's earlier comment about the concern with the government shutdown and its impact on title funds, obviously this would be something we would be asking for your approval in at the October 29th board meeting. So if any information were provided to us that they're stopping that money, we could amend that by that time, but we would have ample time to be able to look into that. But we would be requesting to use title funds to be able to continue the coaching.
Mrs. Amelie, have those in-class coaching dates been scheduled yet?
They haven't.
Okay.
No.
Having been involved in this before, try as you might to make sure that, you know, the days aren't in-service days.
Correct.
And
away from assessments that we're
right,
giving,
away
yes.
from all the, you know, assessments on the calendar, then to make sure each building, you know, does not have a special event going on that day.
Absolutely. That's something that
So-
as we've met, myself, Ms. DeVitro, Ms. Peters, and Ms. Jimenez, we've discussed that and
Yeah.
making sure that we stay away from that
Yeah,
and plan it so
okay.
that we can really get
Right.
exactly what we're
Right.
looking for
And
from the
make,
coaching.
right, make sure that the kids are in the class.
Yeah.
'Cause and you know, I will say that this type of in-class coaching has been very effective in the past with Read 180 and with Scholastic. The mentor has the opportunity to work with the teachers and help increase their effectiveness with the program, which in turn helps increase student achievement. So, you know, it's a wonderful model.
Yes.
It's a great
And
in-class.
if I just can say, they actually go in and observe the
Yep.
teacher for the whole block.
Mhm.
And then they write up a report on what they see is going well and if it needs, you know.
It is professional development at its finest.
Yeah, it
So
is.
many times in education, you take professional development, you pull people out of
Snapshot
classes
now,
and
this
train
is
them.
right in.
And we get
Right.
substitutes in there. No, this is within the classroom structure. Read 180 is a great program, absolutely fantastic.
Then he would debrief with the principal,
Mhm.
right, because I had that
Yeah.
at the middle school.
Yeah.
And I made sure that they came in and coached while the classes were in session.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
And then that's something that the principals, after debriefing with the coach, they're able to focus on that along with the instructor as well, through their walkthroughs and through the evaluation process too. So it is continuous feedback, even though the coach is only coming in 4 times a year.
Mhm. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to letter E, Mr. Reinhardt.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on this point of conversation because I discovered late this afternoon that I was addressing a point that had already been discussed, and there's actually conversations and some progress made previous to tonight. So
Okay.
I'll wait.
Okay.
All right.
All right, thank you. All right, in summary, there is no action that needs to be taken on letters A, B, C. Letter D, I would like to move the issue of paying for the coaching on to the board meeting later, that will take place later this month. Is there anybody who has an issue with that, or you agree to do that? Okay. Letter E was not addressed. Okay, at this point, letter F, is there anybody here tonight who would like to talk about any items on the academics agenda? Okay, all right, seeing none?
If I may, I apologize, Ms. Matthews. For point of clarification, Mr. President and Mr. Reinhardt, we had a request about trying to get some backdated information from Dr. Moskaitis. I want to make sure before we leave this portion, if that is something that Mr. Reinhardt, you would like us to do, to get some back information. So, I mean, I heard that request, and I don't want to leave the meeting without having clear instruction as to what we should be doing.
Right. What I heard was a suggestion from Dr. Moskaitis as to how we might want to lay out these numbers, and I think that's a great idea. The question I would have, and you folks would have to be able to answer that, is are we able to extract from information prior to this the data that's part of this number, this SPP number? Do we have that? Anybody?
With the SPP, what the state is taking the PVOS data and the PIMS data that are reported, and they're marrying them for us in order to generate some of this. So that would be something we would have to discuss with our own child accounting office if we are able to marry it in the same way that they do on their end.
But what Dr. Moskaitis said is what really I think a number of superintendents across the intermediate unit are going to try to do. And that is take these numbers and try to issue to the public, to our public, our own, if you will, our own report card, by breaking down these numbers and saying, here is the graduation rate, here's the attendance rate, here is, and I think that is something that we should do for the community, and I think that's something the board would value as well. If we can do that.
An administrative team, we could discuss that and report back to the board if that, in fact, we can then see if there's a way that we can take the current data and take the back data and actually look at it and place it into the formula to see if we can get a number.
Good try, absolutely.
Yeah. Years ago.
I mean, if not, we can take our previous graduation rate, attendance rate, and just compare it. And
right.
I don't, if we can't put
see
it
if
in
we
the
can.
formula without the PIMS data.
I think there's still a way for us to make it meaningful data, but it may not be exactly the same way, so that we're not just releasing a number.
We may have a school that hasn't, that number may be less than 70, but quite frankly, the attendance rate and some of the other factors in that school may be way above the average for schools across Pennsylvania, and I think it's only right and fair that the community knows that, and the parents and students.
The score isn't just the sole.
Yeah, right, right.
There's a lot more that goes into educating our students than just the
Thank you for that time, and we'll address that at an administrative team meeting.
Okay. Mr. Steckel, perhaps at the next committee meeting, you could just give us a status report, on what you found.
That number, that information?
Yeah, with that information, I mean,
sure.
What you were able to find and how it's going, nothing formal for next month then. Is that okay with you?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
All right, with that, the academics committee is concluded, and I will be passing it off to Mrs. Ellison for policy.
And I am going to pass it off to Mr. Fano to continue with the policy for me, because I have not my glasses.
The first is Mrs. Amelia's mention, and then Ms. Walsh.
Thank you. Before you, I have policy 233, the suspension and expulsion policy. The revisions that are being recommended this evening are just language revisions in order to really fully align this policy with the school code. I made some additions of definitions, and those definitions on page 1 and 2 for suspension, expulsion, informal hearing, and formal hearing. Those are just definitions straight from the school code, but it clarifies right in our policy then what those definitions are. To continue down, one of the points that I tried to do throughout this policy is to remove any language relative to a temporary suspension. School code never references a temporary suspension. A suspension is 1 to 10 days out of school. What we had previously called a temporary suspension in our policy was a suspension of 1 to 3 days. But in school code, a suspension of 1 to 3 days is just a suspension that does not entitle a student to an informal hearing. A suspension of 4 to 10 days would entitle a student to an informal hearing. So I've clarified that through the definitions and removed the word temporary, because any suspension is temporary because it's only 1 to 10 days. When I get to page 3, again, that's just a removal of language that's restating what was already in the policy and in a more clear manner relevant to that issue of temporary and a suspension.
Okay.
On page 4, that's just changing the language from suspension in excess of 10 school days to expulsion, because in school code, anything that is in excess of 10 days would be considered an expulsion. The other changes throughout the policy are minor and just aligning again with current law. Student records are just called student records. They no longer are categorized as A, B, C, and D, so I've taken that out of the policy. And the final addition is just adding in a clause that reflects language from our policy 113.1, and that's relevant to students with disabilities. So these are just really to streamline the policy and make sure that it fully aligns with school code. Are there any questions?
Yes. On page 2.
Yes.
You struck out immediately notify the superintendent of the expulsion.
Yes. No, this would be as a suspension.
Okay, so that's the suspension.
Yes. And we do have a procedure for notification to our offices and subsequently to the superintendent, and those are procedural more so than policy.
Okay, good.
I hope my question isn't too philosophical for where we're sitting today, but does the school code, I guess, does it classify, I guess, what is defined as a school day? Because with block scheduling, when I see a 10-day suspension, in my mind, I'm thinking it's a 20-day suspension because we have a longer class period. The student is now missing out on what I would consider 20 days worth of academic attendance rather than 10.
Yeah, the school code doesn't address that. So the definitions would be reflective of the school code, but that is something that principals are mindful of when levying suspensions.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good question, Rob.
On page 3, just a point of clarification for myself. It talks in the first paragraph about 3 suspensions may result in a recommendation to expel.
Correct.
So that means if there were 3 one-day suspensions, that's the intent
That
as
is
written?
not the intent, no. That three suspensions of any individual student may result in a recommendation. And that doesn't classify the duration of, but those would be administrative decisions, and that would, a student that would have 3 one-day suspensions would never be something that we would consider.
Never is a very strong word. Under that paragraph, you could consider it.
We could, right.
So my question is, if you really don't intend it to be used that way, you might want to have language about a cumulative number of days. Just asking. I mean,
well,
what the intent is.
Yeah, sure. I've seen times when we've had students who have been suspended for 1 day 3 times during the first month of school, and so, or sometimes during the first several weeks of school. So I think, you know, I've always tried to keep it as, I don't know if liberal is a word, but as wide as we can to allow for circumstances for students, because everybody's circumstances are different. And, you know, a first grader who's having a hard time getting himself settled into school may find himself doing things in first grade the first few weeks of school he shouldn't, and there's a 1-day suspension attached. I would hate to see him automatically get, you know, further punished, because our intent, believe me, is to keep kids in school, and that's, you know, these are painful moments when we have to send kids out, but on the other side of it, there are students who rack up suspensions, and after a while it just becomes, because we all know, I think a suspension is less than what we would hope punishment should be for most kids. Suspension is, for many kids, often, you know, 3-4 days away, away from responsibility, away from schoolwork, away from people getting on them and bothering them. And so for some kids, we need to discharge them to someplace else, so to speak.
I have a question. Mrs. Emili, does there need to be any distinction made between in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension in this policy at all?
There wasn't in the prior policy, and there isn't any distinction in school code.
Okay.
So I did not include that in the policy, but I would be open to feedback if you would like me to add something with a distinction.
Well, at this point, it's just a question. I mean, Mr. Reinhardt makes a good point. You know, out-of-school suspension often leaves our students, you know, free will. Parents go to work or, you know, whatever, and it's, you know, time away from school. You know, it's vacation time. In-school suspension is not. It's anything but, you know, it's... So I don't know. I don't know what anybody else thinks about having any distinctions in our policy. If this follows school code, I guess you just leave it that way.
It's described and discussed in student handbooks that are provided to the students at each level, because it does look different at the 5, 6, 7, 8 in high school. So it is outlined there.
Okay.
But it isn't currently in policy.
Okay.
And with our IEP students on an in-school suspension, then obviously we have to do some teaching, instruction in that component, correct?
Correct.
So those kids are generally, because of an IEP or maybe a 504, would go into an in-school suspension and monitor that.
And provided instruction accordingly, yeah.
Do you know if there are policies for in-school suspension available from other sources? Because that raises a good issue, that we might want to look at an in-school suspension policy and see if other districts may have it that defines what in-school is and how it's utilized.
Yeah, we can work with PSBA to see if there's any.
See if there's any out there. I think the delineation is certainly important enough to look at, because there clearly is a huge difference between in school and out of school. Purpose here is focused clearly on the out of school.
And going back to Dr. Moscoitis' question, it's unacceptable behavior for students to harass other students, school personnel, sexually or otherwise. Extreme or persistent behavior. I look at that if there's physical assault, if there's severe vandalism. I mean, you're talking extreme cases, and you suspend that kid 3 times, that student 3 times. That student may not belong in that setting. And to me, as a principal, I may need to look for an expulsion to place that student elsewhere in alternative placement. That's what I would look at, you know, I think with the three suspensions, that you could look at an expulsion. I'm looking at the real severe cases, really students that are not learning from the experience of being suspended. That's the way I interpret that, if that helps you. Of course, I would look at a second grader who was in in-school suspension or time after 3 days, 3 suspensions. That obviously, I mean, I'm looking at more of the secondary because I've seen that situation. So I don't know if that helps.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the superintendent, following up on Dr. Muskaitis' comment.
Sure.
The question. If his question was, technically, he could be recommended for expulsion after 3 suspensions, 1-day suspensions. That would involve triggering a bunch of checks and balances, which involve the board, which would
Yes.
hearing.
Yes.
Would have a tendency for administrators not to frivolously recommend a suspension. So I think I don't have any concerns about having numbers in there because of the checks and balances that would become involved in the process later on.
That's a good point, because there is a check and balance. Administrators' point of view, you have the director's level point of view, and you have the superintendent's check and balance, and then ultimately in an expulsion, the board's check and balance. So, you know, there are a lot of places along the way when anyone who feels that we may not be giving someone a fair shake can speak up and look at it. But as I said to you, you know, my philosophy is, you know, we're here to keep kids in school, and however, the reality is that, you know, there are times that behaviors from some individuals are dangerous. They are not showing signs of remorse and self-control, and it's those extenuating circumstances where this, I think, would kick in. And I think, you know, you'd find that most districts do have that. I wish there was a way that we could expand. I mean, the Easton School District has, I think, done a great job in terms of addressing a population of students who need some intensive assistance with all of those things, and by you know, establishing the academy. But there are clearly other students who, you know, are in between, and this gives us an opportunity to work with them. I wish we could afford an in-school suspension program K to 12, because that's the way to go. And with lots of those kids, where we wouldn't have to send them home, keep them in tow, keep them busy. But that's not easy with the personnel, and quite frankly, with the customers. We have lots of customers at times. So,
any other questions for Alyssa? I just want Alyssa, you're also going to be taking this now back to Erin for review, right?
Erin did review this.
Oh, she did?
Yes, she added in the final piece about the students with disabilities.
Okay. Usually I thought we were talking about it and then it was going to Erin.
Traditionally, it has not been that.
Yeah.
I do the policy first and have always sent it to Erin for review prior to sending it on to the board. I'm the one who's making all of the initial changes.
Right. Right. That would be true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking back to our meeting over in Fort about a year ago. So, okay.
A year ago.
Yeah.
Erin has always been the one that had forwarded these to the committee. And it came from administration to Erin to hear.
Okay. Moving on then.
Good evening, everyone. I have policy 810-1, drug and alcohol use for covered drivers, which was adopted in December of 2006. I will go over the highlights with you. Under definition on page 1, definition of a covered driver at the bottom of the paragraph, it says, it shall also cover any and all district employees who are transporting students in the scope of their employment. So, that kind of widens the definition of what a covered driver could be. It's not just a bus driver any longer. Could be an athletic coach, in my view. Moving on to the next paragraph, we are now including part-time employees. I guess there was no reference of part-time employees. Many of our bus drivers are part-timers. The preceding word says full-time. And the sentence at the very end of that paragraph, just to be a little more clear, maintenance employees and mechanics who operate district vehicles as part of their employment shall be deemed to be regularly assigned to drive school district vehicles and shall be covered by this policy. Right, on page 2, number 5, guidelines, employee prohibitions. The second paragraph under that, I believe it's in blue, I think on your form. Any covered driver who operates a vehicle while taking drugs, substances prescribed by a physician, as described above, is required to provide written documentation of such physician's certification to the driver's immediate supervisor prior to operating a vehicle while under the influence of such drugs or substances. And then if you go down 3 more paragraphs, no covered driver shall refuse to submit to post-accident random, reasonable suspicion or follow-up alcohol or drug test required under this policy. And the new part says any covered driver who refuses to submit shall be immediately suspended and may be subject to termination. And we would always go through an investigation and afford everybody their due process rights. On the next page, page 3, towards the bottom, under item number 3, if the district receives credible evidence that a covered driver has operated a motor vehicle under the influence of drugs or alcohol, either while on duty or off duty, or presents for duty under the influence of drugs or alcohol, the driver shall be terminated. In such instance, the driver shall be immediately suspended pending termination proceedings. Such suspension and termination shall occur regardless of whether the covered driver is convicted of driving under the influence. And I think you know that within the transportation contract or bus driver contract that the board approved tonight, there is language within the discipline section pretty much similar to this, that any off-duty, well actually this is for would be an off-duty DUI arrest. We would have the same right to go through an investigation, and if it does prove true that the driver, one of our drivers off-duty was driving under the influence, they would be subject to termination proceedings. I don't believe I read that next paragraph. Covered drivers who are arrested for, charged with, but not yet convicted of driving under the influence or any other drug or alcohol-related violation related to the operation of a motor vehicle shall be immediately suspended regardless of whether the incident occurred while the driver was on or off duty. And on page 5, is skip to page 5. About halfway down where it says duties of the transportation department. This is talking about when we have reasonable suspicion that an employee is at work under the influence of drugs or alcohol. We just added in item number 1 that when we meet with the employee, we would afford them the right to have appropriate union representation where applicable, and we do that in all cases anyway. It's obviously actually a matter of our contracts as well in most cases. Going on to page 7, at the top, number 3, random testing, which is a federal law for our covered drivers. We added random testing shall be conducted on all covered drivers. Down at the bottom, we do have a typo. The very last word should be practicable, and we will change that. And I think those are all the highlights that I wanted to present to the board this evening. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Or defer to Mr. Freund.
Very good, John.
Yes.
I could say this has already been sort of court tested, so.
I have a question on how it refers to the employees who are not, whose primary job is not driving, but may occasionally drive a student, or how do you regulate, how do you get information on if a coach is driving a a group of students to an event,
Well, I underlined one of the sections
do
here.
they need to get permission first, or?
I underlined one section here that talks about the things that we need to do behind the scenes, and that's one of the items. We need to tighten up those kinds of questions. We need to make sure we're working together so we know who is operating vehicles with children.
So let's say a hypothetical coach has an infraction, that won't jeopardize his position as coach necessarily, but it will impose upon him the restriction that he can't drive the student athletes anymore, or how do you intend to, you following?
I think I'm following you.
Okay.
So if a coach is driving children and is...
Yeah, a coach who, his primary job isn't to drive students around, but he may drive students around occasionally for events.
There's a definition in here that might cover that. You have to be regularly assigned.
Okay, so it's...
Well, in paragraph 2, it says it shall cover any all district employees who are transporting students in the scope of their employment.
Yeah, but then if you go on, but maybe that might be inconsistent with when you're on the definition of a covered driver. Is someone who is regularly assigned.
Because if a coach, his primary duties is not driving, but coaching, but may occasionally drive his students, if he has an infraction under this policy, he won't be terminated from his coaching position, but he may be restricted from driving students. Is that the intent? And is that spelled out clearly enough in here?
I would think, per the policy, an investigation would be conducted, and it could result in termination. That's my understanding.
Okay.
But is that clear in the policy?
Well, I think Mr. Freund is looking for that now.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. What you're saying is if a person has a DUI on a Saturday night and he's a coach, and he comes to work on Monday, does he lose his job, or is he still able to coach, or is he able? Does that just exclude him from driving students to the next tennis match or something? Yeah. That's a very good question.
Or advisor, or a student.
Yes. Right.
At Fed.
Or FBLA
He's taking
or
students
something.
to DECA or whatever.
Sure. Now and what complicates a little further on the athletic end is I don't believe that we as an organization approve each time a coach takes a team in a vehicle on their own. I don't think that's approved.
I don't know if Mr. Simonetta's office would get involved in that through
Yeah.
insurance.
Liability, if we're using our vehicles for a school purpose, where procedures should be, and something we need to follow up on, copy of license, insurance, and quite frankly, I think a motor vehicle check is involved. I think it should be prior approval.
Our esteemed
It's right in front
counsel.
of it. Who is regularly assigned to drive a school district vehicle, then it says, who is regularly assigned. I don't know who put that last one in there, John, but that's, I don't know how this gets stuck in, but if you look right above there, it would apply to only employees who are regularly assigned.
Yes,
It covers any and all district employees who are transporting students in the scope of their employment.
You might want to consider.
But a coach is transporting students.
I might consider
to an
taking
event.
that out as a little bit of overkill. Because it raises all these questions that don't come legitimate questions.
Kerry, to answer your question, my statement, when it's come to our attention that they were driving or requested to drive.
Right.
That has been asked for since we know that. But I think we need to work on those and maybe put them as an administrative procedure or regulation.
Right.
And institute that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just one question on page,
I just want to ask, are we saying are we deleting, recommending that we
Well,
delete that
if
section?
you look at the definition of a covered driver, it's internally inconsistent. I mean, first it says that a covered driver is someone who is regularly assigned to drive a school district vehicle, and then we say it's, well, it's everything, it's anything.
Well, if you transport children.
In your POV, privately owned vehicle.
Yeah, I know, but that's inconsistent. That's kind of draconian too.
Have a coach, I take a kid home.
There's liability.
Yeah.
There's liability, but do you want to assign all those same obligations to a coach who occasionally does this as you do a school bus driver? So I think we can work on it.
Okay, we can talk about it.
Make it so it's not so blatantly inconsistent.
Okay.
You're going to follow back up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well, it's inconsistent the way it is, but it's.
I think I heard Bill Ryder say, as a principal, probably no less than 6 times a year, I'm taking a child home because they're off the bus and now a neighbor called and they're crying, so I have to go get them and take them somewhere. So there's lots of what ifs in that.
Yeah, I don't think that when this was done, it was intended to apply in that situation.
Okay, any other comments?
just another clarification question. On page 2, the first major change.
Yes.
Person is taking a painkiller, his doctor says take it. It's a common painkiller. Doesn't have to report it. Is it only for prescriptions?
I think it goes back, Bob, I think it goes back again to us having fixed the definition of a covered driver. If it's someone who regularly, they drive a bus, they drive a van, they drive kids regularly, that would be a stronger reason to report any medication that they might affect them. But like, as is noted here, the principal's, taking Tylenol that day because of that's what the job creates. And that's to take someone home. That's an entire.
You know what I'm asking? You know what? It's not about a covered driver.
No. But I think that's a solution. I think it's overbroad as it's put down because it deals with a covered driver who has to make all these reports. If you're not a covered driver, then you wouldn't have to report every piece of medication. I think that's where we're going.
So every day that person would say be taking Tylenol, he has to make a report to his supervisor?
I don't interpret it that way. If you look at the paragraph up above that, when the use is pursuant to the written instructions or prescription of a physician who has advised the driver that the substance does not adversely affect the driver's ability to safely operate a commercial motor vehicle, any covered driver while taking drug substances, as described above, is required to provide written documentation. I don't take it to mean Tylenol. You can get over the counter. But if you're, I've always advised employees, if you're taking painkillers, you have a prescription, you should disclose that. In those rare instances when I've had conversations with people.
But this would require it, and they should, so there's going to be some training or heavy communication so they don't get in trouble inadvertently.
This might be something where we might want to make a list of examples.
For example, a plumber who takes the plumbing truck around, gets a offense while off duty, he may not be able to drive the plumbing truck around anymore, but he can still perform plumbing duties as long as someone else drives the truck for him.
Not per this policy, the way it's written.
I know, but
Right.
that I think we need to make a difference there, where a plumber.
But we don't have the luxury to have someone drive, drive the plumber around.
Well,
you know what I mean? Seriously, we don't.
I don't know how many plumbers you have.
The manpower to do that.
I don't know how many plumbers you have in your schedule, but.
I can't say in past history that didn't happen. I can't say that.
If you want to exceed expectations, for John? Hey guys, let's reel it in. Other questions for John? No? Okay, we'll move on. Next is Mr. Reinhardt on the non-school.
Oh my goodness.
Right, if I could just ask you to look at page 4 of the policy 913, it says travel services, foreign trips, and it says solicitation and sale of travel services for foreign trips to students will not be permitted. Actually, we have a policy for student group travel abroad. It's 121.1. I gave you a copy. I guess I'm asking if we can delete that from policy 913, because we already have a policy that really does define student travel group abroad. So it's really contradictory to what 121.1 says.
Comments, questions? Anyone?
Is it contradictory or just redundant?
It's contradictory, actually. 121.1 says that the district will not sponsor group travel abroad, but
We do.
it does not prohibit travel, but it clearly states the district is not advocating and does not take a position with it. So the district shall assume no liability for an individual, whether student or district employee, because we do have a lot of trips, you know, at certain levels that students take advantage of, parents do, and they're wonderful opportunities. And we don't, so it contradicts that. We don't want that to happen. We're not recommending that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, last one. You were going to comment on the mission philosophy of education.
Well, I just wanted to share with you, the question was raised at our last board meeting, because we've had this policy on for a number of times. I guess it's been pending. The source of the change was a committee that was called together, I believe it was last spring, winter, sometime last year. And what their job was to try to make our mission statement more succinct and more brief, and hopefully more to the point. And I found the source. I just wanted you all to know that there was a committee that was assigned to that formed to do that. And if you want to move further with this, that's up to the board.
I think the only thing that I was thinking of, and I mentioned to you, Reiner, is that in doing this, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we have the philosophy of our mission statement all over the place.
Yes, we do. Yes. And that is a very good point and an issue to consider. Because obviously the district made it it was very important for the district to post the mission statement and the belief statements, and they did a great job with that. We'd now have to go and collect all those and reprint them all. And so the question is the wordsmithing of the mission statement that valuable at this time that we would go through that entire process of collecting and reposting all those mission statements?
John, the real question was, who was on this committee? What did they represent? And I don't think I see any names.
No, you know what? That's been a source of question. We have several people that sat here, that are sitting here tonight, who sat on the committee, and I'm going to turn that over to you guys to, if you would, please help us understand who was on that committee.
Well, can we just get that list, get the names and positions?
I don't think there was a list. We couldn't find one.
It would have been the Excellence by Design.
Oh, the Excellence Design by,
Yes.
okay,
It was
committee.
as we were transitioning from AFG
District
to Excellence by Design. It was the Citizenship Committee.
So you
And
never
that was
had
it.
minutes, and we never kept minutes, we never kept notes, we never had people sign in.
Yeah, they did.
Then you have names. Then we can provide names.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Who kept minutes?
They were on the old website. They were all stored on the old AFG website, which I think I could probably dig out of my archives.
Oh, good, all right. Then that'll take care of that. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, but along these lines, since we're discussing this district philosophy and mission statement, we no longer subscribe to AFG. So, it's plastered all over
Well, we do
the place.
excellence by design.
Correct,
Which is.
but it is not accreditation for growth.
It's not accreditation for growth, but it's performed, the assessment is performed by the same agency.
Okay, but it's not AFG as this district knows it from the past. So what are we, if we're going to, well, I think we need to have a discussion. Are those things going to remain up everywhere? No, AFG?
Well, I think we need to assess why they were up. I don't think they were just up there. AFG was the instigator of it, but people felt that it was important to put it up so that the district citizens recognized what our mission was, so that people that work in the community, in the schools, recognize what our mission was. That's why it was put up there.
We did AFG from K to 12. We're doing excellence by design only at the high school, correct?
If I may, that transition came, when Steve first was heading that, along with Paula Fisher, and then it transitioned into heading our Dallas recording secretary. That was exactly what they said, a transition from AFG to excellence by design, then streamlined into a transition to strategic planning and KTO literacy strategic planning. As part of those committees, elementary principals, secondary principals, and a select handful of teachers were charged by our administration to review our mission statement and vision statement as part of our strategic literacy plan. Strategic plan to decide whether changes needed to be had or not.
And that was the comprehensive.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but it's not the strategic plan anymore.
I'm glad you did.
It's the comprehensive.
So is that where
District comprehensive plan.
Is that where the change in philosophy came? Was through that?
I don't know if there's a change in philosophy. It was a charge by our administration to that team to discuss whether or not the mission and vision statements were still congruent and were too wordy, too memorable, or not memorable
And this
enough.
is where this new statement was created, correct?
It was created at that point, but not moved forward to anywhere in particular.
But somehow landed on the board's plate to change.
Because all those processes require us to review that statement. And so each of those things that she listed required that group of people at those intervals, and they were different. But we have lists. They were different at each of those intervals because it requires you to review the mission, make recommendations. The issue is the policy then says that it's a policy. I mean, it is a policy.
So
the district's mission is a policy. And that's how it landed there in terms of that recommendation asking for approval to change it.
So just to make it clear, it wasn't necessarily a citizenship committee. It was a committee of whatever you just described, correct?
The teachers that remained on
Right.
the committee were teachers who were previously assigned to citizenship.
Okay. But I just so that we understand, because the citizenship committee is something that's totally, what was originally in the citizenship committee isn't necessarily what.
An SMC
you
committee
just
that we're
said.
talking about here in relation to that exercise is defunct. That was a 6 to 8 month ago committee that hadn't
Right,
since.
right, okay.
I'm very sorry that I brought this one up. So, we have all gotten far too much information here that maybe we need to have. But thank you for that history of that, and that I think. But the problem lies in what Tracy just said, and that's trying to trace this over the course of time, and it's very confusing because we, as a district, obviously, we're moving in a direction there. I guess the question is, do we want to, as a board, adopt the one that was recommended, or do you want to keep the other one there and keep moving on. I guess that would really be the question.
Or do we want to direct that we want to really do it?
Or convene another committee, well, right, convene another group to review this and put a stamp of approval on it, so. And that's something we could easily do.
Is there any comments? Keep it the way it is. You guys think about the cost we're going to incur. Go out and start up and looking at this again. I mean, that's something we can do at a workshop if we want to take on that task. Or number 3, take what's there.
Well, the only point I would make is that you had professionals who sat down at a table. It sounds like many different hours you've spent at different points in time to try to get something that's working well for you so that you could move beyond the mission statement and educate. Right? So now we're going to second guess what they've been.
Typically, your boards do that.
I know, but.
I don't know if anybody's married to that. It was a task given to us at hand. My comment would be, is our current vision and mission statement still philosophically in line with what our school directors want our district to represent? If it is, I don't know if you have to change it. If it isn't, maybe you do.
Well, I guess my comment was based on the fact that it must have not been married because it was.
I think the exercise is all about making it shorter, not necessarily the content, more.
Okay.
Mission statements often can roll off the tongue of people. Walking down the street and say, what's your district about? Ours does not do that.
Right.
But that was the exercise.
Okay.
And through our accreditation process, we were told by the folks who sat with us to give us our rating, you need to shorten your mission statement because you don't know it verbatim. So
that adds another task, and we can all memorize the current mission statement and take it off the table, I guess.
Bob?
I'm sorry that all your time was wasted in such an exercise. How many times a day does the superintendent's office get a call from the public asking about your mission statement? Enough. If we don't know what the purpose of a school district in Pennsylvania is supposed to be doing, I don't think we need to have hours and hours of debate. And then every time we change directors, we'll wordsmith this word versus that. I don't think that's very productive.
So the question is, I mean, it's a simple question. Do we change the mission statement? Do we leave it the same?
My vote would, if it came up for a vote, my vote would be no. Move on to educating children rather than talking about mission statements.
Let our teachers teach.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? Thoughts? That's the end of it.
Consensus. We've reached consensus.
Okay, public to be heard on any of the policy agenda items. Anyone this evening? Yes, sir.
Mr. President. Mr. Castrovinci, sort of a laugh, or not a laugh. You may or may not have to supply a driver's helper to drive for somebody, because in today's screwy world, as Mr. Freund pointed out before, if you do it for one, you may be stuck for all. So if you provide an assistant for somebody while he's on light duty under ADA, somebody who comes in with a medically necessity need that requires his impairment, we're trapped. So you've got to put all kinds of stuff or leave it out of your policy because there's no end to what somebody else will do to you. And I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to say you've had it both ways. And I've been in the HR seat where we've bent for one and gotten zapped for 10 more. But in terms of your comments about trying to keep kids in school, I'm lost because it's been a long time since I sat in a teacher's role in a very different environment. But if you've got 180 kids on your roster, one or two troublemakers can really be stealing education from 178 other children by just driving you nuts. And at some point, you need to get them out. But then when you get them out, and they eventually come back, whether it's been through suspension or expulsion, or they've just been delinquent, then somebody else, once you get them back up to speed, be sure they graduate on time and they know all those things so that they can read a tape measure and tell time. So you're damned if you do, darned if you don't. And by the way, if you expel them, I think ultimately you're required to provide them a free public education elsewhere anyway at your ludicrously high expense to do it. So I don't know what the solutions are other than dynamite. But I would suggest in a very limited fashion, the technology of the internal cyber program may provide you some alternatives within the building that are somewhat cost effective. And force people to do that, or off-site under your control through other community resources, a cyber site which is linked, so you're not paying somebody else an exorbitant amount. But I did want to raise a question. When is a student actually out of school? Because in Pennsylvania, you can be out at, what, 16, 15, or 14, depending, which in some cases invites kids to go out, back, out, back, out, back. And I couldn't find any place in the code that allowed you to put a stop to that. Does anybody know?
I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say out, back, out, back.
If a student drops out, he's entitled to readmission ad nauseum.
Problem.
And our neighbors in Ohio have used that to circumvent being part of the testing base, because a new student is not in the base, so we put them out the door and bring them back in. And I'm merely suspecting that districts like Philadelphia might play the same game to juggle the books. But from your standpoint, when do you stop spending money?
Well, I don't know, but I would say to you that we all have to believe in the adage that we can never give up on any of them. So that would also mean that they're welcome back as many times as it takes to get that diploma and to be able to achieve. I think the door's got to be open.
That's
as long as they're not a danger to themselves or a danger to others, and someone quits, has a bad experience, comes back, quits, comes back. As long as they continue to make an attempt, the door's got to be open, I think.
Unfortunately, I would disagree that in 2013, that's a very, very, very expensive position.
It's also expensive, though, not to have them come back.
In the
You know what I'm
extreme.
saying?
And I understand, you want every child to go out with the best possible options.
Sure.
I guess the question is, how do you balance it?
Yes,
And
that's a good question.
you're more liberal than I,
Perhaps.
then you have a budget.
Anyone else this evening?
Mr. President, may I make one more comment?
Sure, please.
On the same topic as Mr. Anderson so eloquently spoke on, I'm a little bit concerned about this whole 10-day thing, and I would just like to submit perhaps that very special consideration be given to the amount of time that we have students out of the classroom, out of instructional time. That's given me a little bit of trouble, knowing that there's potential for a student to miss 70 minutes of class 5 days per week for what would essentially equate to 2 full school weeks. That's very troubling to me, and I would like to make sure that special consideration is taken in that regard. Thank you.
You should know that work is provided for students. We try to make sure that they're able to keep up at home if they're so motivated to do so. And for many kids, they do try that. I don't know, Mr. Cook, would you, any response to that whole notion of missing?
There are very few disciplinary situations that result in consequences that are 10 days, Mr. Vandenberg. The high school administrative team has looked at this very closely over the last 2 years as we come across these particular scenarios. And anytime there is a severe, maybe severe for lack of a better term, and late at night, but when there are the health, the safety factor comes into question. So we're talking about a fight, an assault, or something that's of a serious nature. That's when those severe penalties are levied, and they're, and to be honest with you, in the majority of the cases, they're borderline expulsion in many districts within Pennsylvania. We use our directors to kind of guide us in that process, but there are very few suspensions that aren't at that level. that would be a 10-day suspension. Anything under that would be 5 days, and we are extremely consistent with our levying of consequences through grades 9 through 12. There are 2,650 students in our building, and a multitude of issues arise, but we, like Mr. Reinhardt stated, our responsibility is to educate students. So the last thing that we want to do is to put them in a situation where we're unable to do that, and to put a student in a situation where they're unable to get back on track academically upon their return. I could also say that it is only the second year, and we're looking at, in lieu of 10 days, 5 days in, 5 days out. So there are a multitude of scenarios that that we're looking at. But I could also say that there are situations where their 10-day suspension will be levied, and our assistant principals and principals right now feel like that's extremely important. And I can tell you, in those cases, it's because they are situations that might be expelled. And they are safety issues, bites, possession of drugs, those sort of things are the 10 days that you're going to see, Mr. Vandenberg, not necessarily something that has not risen to that level.
The severity of those 10 days are also many times paralleled with an arrest and law enforcement becoming involved with that. And then when you multiply all those things, then many times it is a 10-day. You don't have a lot of choices.
But we are closely looking at that, Mr. Vandenberg, at each situation. And believe me, exactly what your concern is what the assistant principals are talking about every time one of these sort of things hits the radar.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Good. If not, it sounds like policy 233 and 810 are going back for review to come back again. It sounds like 913 can have the line removed. 101 ends up being totally closed out and dropped at this point in time. And that concludes the summary. So moving on to athletics.
Yes, we have Mr. Cusack here. We'd like to offer just a few updates to the board.
Back when we signed the contract with St. Luke's to supply us with a trainer and coverage, I was asked to come back and give some feedback. Mr. Gary Gardner, the athletic trainer covering for us right now in place of Mr. Hunt, who retired, doing an exceptional job. We're getting a lot out of St. Luke's that are a lot of extras right now. The timeliness of the athletes and the doctor visits next morning after football games, routinely throughout the week for other athletes. Their doctors are even coming to our campus a few days a week to check on athletes in the training room, giving our trainers some expertise on different taping methods and things also to rehab the athletes and get them back on the playing fields. St. Luke's is also providing our 2 Easton School District employees, Rochelle Gilbert and Tracy Lenore, as trainers, giving them in-service, inviting them to various meetings at St. Luke's. So that's helping them to learn more of what's going on in the bigger picture of sports management and athletic training. So in my mind, the St. Luke's contract that they're giving us, a lot of extras, and we even have a new trainer on staff right now. Just filling in the meantime as an extra is Maria Pavlo. They had her available at St. Luke's. She is a licensed trainer, and right now they did not have a housing area for her, so she's actually an extra trainer that they're giving to us for $0 for extra coverage time. We do have a lot going on, a lot of variety of campuses, the stadium, the middle school, the high school, indoor, outdoor, so Maria has picked up some of that slack in the meantime, and as long as they're willing to give that to us, we'll take her and use her expertise. So that's a little bit about St. Luke's and what is going on there.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on that? Okay, next one, Title IX update. Title IX, 1972 education law. Early on, a lot of male sports, college setting, felt it was like they were taking away from the males, giving to females. It's actually an education law. It has spilled over into the athletic environment, mostly at the college level. That is now coming down to the high school level. The last 3 years I've been attending some conferences and meetings, and it is now here and live at the high school level. It is a mandatory PDE law, Act 92. Our Eastern Area School District report is ready, has been given to Mr. Cortez, Barry Cortez, and uploaded into PIMS
to meet that October 15th deadline. The next deadline for that report is November 15th. By November 15th, right now the document is not nice and viewable. It doesn't look pretty. The font is very small. It's a locked document. So we're trying to find what it's going to look like when we upload this onto our website by November 15th. So I'll be contacting Ian McIntyre shortly. I'll look to see if maybe our duplicating center can do something that is better. The one document in page is 9 font. And at almost 47 years old, I'm having a hard time seeing the 9 font. So I'll work with her expertise and see what we can do on that. Julie Rubino has helped tremendously on getting all this information together. Results will be posted by November 15th. What that is we have to go back and report uniform costs for different teams, transportation costs, how many kids are on each team, on each level, and so on. The problem with that is up to about 5 years ago, we did report, for example, if we have 4 levels of football, I had 4 separate budget lines for football: varsity, junior high, middle school. About 5 years ago, we went the opposite way, and it was easy to lump everything in together under one football budget. So I've had to go back and try to figure out what equipment is being used for a middle school basketball team versus a varsity. What uniforms are bought for this team versus that team. Very, very cumbersome. So I'm working with Mr. Simonetta and Barry Cortez for next year to have it almost separated currently, so it gives us a better picture of what we're spending on each team, instead of going back and counting uniforms, helmets, basketballs, softballs, and so on. 2013-14 school year currently, we have to be reporting and gathering information on booster clubs. Mrs. Ellison, you and I went through this about 3 years ago. I look back at my records on policy 915. And we sat here and the booster clubs had a lot of resentment. I have the newspaper articles. However, Act 82, next October 15th, requires me to collect what booster clubs bring in and what they donate to the high school, to the school district. Tomorrow night is a booster club meeting at 6 o'clock with all booster presidents, Mr. Simonetta, and I hold that yearly. This year it's going to be a little bit of a different conversation because this is mandatory. If they raise $10,000 and donate $8,000, we need to know what is being donated per this reporting law. And then that will be uploaded next October 15th to November 15th.
Jim, is that related to, is that gender specific? For example, if is the purpose of that to look at what's being spent on male athletes versus female athletes?
At the collegiate level, that's what it got to that point.
Yeah.
This is for high schools, and we have to do a middle school report and a high school report. I have to do both. It's a reporting law. Reporting means we gather it, and it goes on our website, it goes on a document, a paper copy downstairs. There is no comparison at this point over, again, Title IX is not an equality. It looks at ratios and percentages. If you spend $5,000 on males, you don't have to spend 5 on females, but you have to have a ratio of athletes and a percentage. That's what it is based on. So currently it's just a reporting law. We have to gather it, report it, document it, and then draw conclusions from there if we choose to do that.
Yeah, not contradicting anything that points out. The booster thing is driven by Title IX. And the OCR that enforces Title IX has in the last couple of years begun to focus on contributions of booster clubs with regard to whether or not that creates an inequality of programming and funding. So it is motivated,
By gender.
It's motivated by Title IX. That's what it's about.
Could I see us 3 to 5 years from now restructuring our booster clubs, how we bring money in, ultimately donations that come in from alumni and given to a specific team? We have to start looking at that, and that would be our policy 915 that we would have to start to look at and have some document. Right now, as we stated, Mr. Foyne, it's like a reporting law, but again, people will draw conclusions from that. We can then make our own adjustments in our athletic programs down the road. The first year or two, we'll put it on the wall, look at it, and see if we need to make some adjustments. I'm very confident that our female and our male athletes currently are receiving very, very equal or proportionate money, respect, facilities, and so on. The times of the games are the same. It's not as if we're giving one gender more or less than another on purpose. Sometimes it's a facility issue. That is just a facility issue we have right now, things like that. Okay, so tomorrow night, Mr. Simon and I will meet at 6 o'clock with them to at least start this policy. I have some forms available that I've gathered throughout the state from the OCR and PDE on how we can start to gather that and go from there. Okay, large document, a lot of information over the last 6 months to gather. In case you want to know who our Title IX coordinator is, or advisor, I believe it's Mr. Castrovinci, and he has so chosen me to gather that information, right, Mr. C?
Exactly. And designee, right?
Yeah. Designee. Any questions on Title IX? Just wanted to give you an update of that as you start to hear that, and that document is put downstairs and on our website. Last one is the league expansion. I made a comment about 2 or 3 months ago, and so did Mr. Cupp. We've attended a lot of meetings on this. We've been through this before with joining with the Mountain or Pocono schools and so on. We were happy with our 12 teams in our conference up and down Route 22. Some of our members of our league would like to expand and add some more teams, which means we had to join with them, or else we would be with 3 or 4 teams left in the league possibly with no one else to play. So that will go into effect starting next school year. We do currently play them in a variety of sports and a few contests. So we do send a bus to Pocono Mountain and East Stroudsburg and so on. So it's not unlike we don't play them currently. It's just that now they will be part of our Lehigh Valley Interscholastic Athletic Conference. I have a meeting Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. I will then start to look at and gather schedules if that will require a little bit more travel. I don't think it will too much because they're looking at keeping our schools in a division and theirs in a division and only needing to play against them about the same amount of times we currently play them now. So I'm not looking at an extreme amount of budget increase for transportation. So I'm pretty confident it will work and we can make that work out.
Any questions for Mr. Kristof?
Is there any educational reason why we're doing this?
Well, the state of Pennsylvania and the PIAA, and Mr. Wright will tell you as a longtime coach, things start to get driven by playoffs and championships and things like that. And what it comes down to is we have a number of 4A teams, if you want to call it that, which are the largest classification in Pennsylvania. So a lot of your games and your schedule is based on PowerPoints and the size of the schools you play. If we were to play, let's say, a single A school as Pius X up in Bangor, we don't get a lot of points for that because we're a big school, they're a small school. So a schedule is driven a lot by that now. In the way of educational value, we do offer a lot of co-curriculars, like debate and chess, and we sponsor those. We run those as athletic directors for those non-athletic type teams. They even run Science Olympiad, Model UN, and we actually, as athletic directors, make a schedule for that and oversee those. And educational value in the way of, with the league.
Yeah, what's the value of doing this for us? Because what I worry about, will you not have to release students from class earlier?
Dr. Moscudis, that's a very good point. I was going to make a comment to the effect that the Lehigh Valley Interscholastic Athletic Conference isn't just athletic directors, but it's also representation of all the principals. The board of principals meet basically on a quarterly basis to review these issues. There are many reasons why various schools wanted to expand and get bigger within the conference. One of the things the principals had to bring everybody back to is what is the academic value for our students. One of the emphasis that Jim and the rest of the athletic directors will look at on Thursday morning is that our focus is athletic directors go do the schedule, but we can't lose instructional time. You can't cost us any more money than we're already spending because our budgets are all tight, and so make it work. And so on Thursday morning, Jim and the athletic directors from both organizations are going to be working together. But I wanted to emphasize another thing, Dr. Mosquedis, and that is that with the movement towards this idea of merging Mountain Valley Conference and Lehigh Valley Interscholastic Athletic Conference, is there no longer is a merger. This is the Lehigh Valley Interscholastic Conference is accepting these teams under our umbrella. And that is extremely important academically because these co-curricular or these extracurricular activities that we offer that are scholastically based, are academic based, weren't necessarily in existence in the MVC and wouldn't necessarily be in existence in the case of a merger. So what Jim was kind of explaining to you was that when you look around the table at everybody in the conference and they're saying, we want to expand, we want to expand, we want to expand, we want to expand, we want to expand. Easton, you're so stuck in your traditions and your ways down here, you want to stay where you're at, you know, you need to move. And so after a while, we looked at what is our best position into keeping what we feel is extremely important. And so the other piece of this is we also have a character development group that started with leaders within our schools that get together from Deere, from Allen, from all of our sponsoring schools, and we want to keep those intact because there's extreme academic value to having students compete in Model UN. There's extreme academic value in scholastic scrimmage. There's extreme academic value in allowing students to take on leadership roles in extracurricular activities because it's an extension of what they're learning in the classroom. And so this expansion was something we had to do, and the way in which we did it was to keep the scholastic piece there. But it's going to be a yeoman's job of the athletic directors within these two organizations, so to speak, to ensure that we don't lose instructional time and that we do have schedules that aren't going to increase our budgets. I have faith that it can occur because the structures are in place now to say, you have a group of teams competing here, you have a group of teams competing here, you have a group of teams competing here, and then there's a playoff scenario that allows them all to say who is, you know, going to rise above, so to speak, in these athletic events. But the principals were not silent in this deliberation and discussion because we asked the very same question. How does this help our schools and our primary focus of educating? And I think, you know, one of the things that we had to do as a result was to protect the integrity of the Lehigh Valley Interscholastic Athletic Conference and focus on what we had available there because we are very proud of those extracurricular activities. You can ask any principal in the conference how important they are to the academic structures in all of our schools. I hope that answered your question.
No, that's good. So there's a requirement for the MVC schools to add those if they do not have them?
They will run in place. Any school can opt not to participate in those events. Okay, there's things in our bylaws to allow them to say, we don't want to do scholastic scrimmage. That's fine. But the other 12 schools in our conference do participate. So that's the key to keeping the Lehigh Valley Conference intact, is those programs and how much they mean to our student base.
And they're all overseen by the principals also.
We are now the Model UN advisor, so Sarah Waskira is now running that show up at Lehigh. And if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. And I'll also emphasize the fact that we win quite a bit. The competitive side.
Any other questions? No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I
Thank
think
you,
there's a
Jim.
simple we're back to any public comments on the athletics? Seeing no hands, and the summary is, these were just updates, there is nothing to go forward. Moving on to finance, Mike.
Okay, I will again do my part to keep this meeting moving at a fast pace. But I didn't want to take these, I did not get all the proposals that I wanted to in time to send it out to the board on Friday, and all the information. But I didn't want to take these two items off the agenda because of how important they are. I wanted to get it on your radar, and that the information will be coming. We've been looking at updating, along with the security plans. I think we've talked about the district-wide communications for our shortfall, thereabouts. We have radios that communicate only in the building. We have 2 different vendors for radios for our district, and we looked at consolidating and increasing the communications among administrators, central office administration, as an example, we can't even hear what's going on at the high school. And that's something that was addressed early on in our plan. So what I will be presenting to you is a proposal to, much like we did with the cameras a couple years ago, one vendor, one radio company, and a district-wide ability to communicate principals to principals, principals to central admin, in the building, to other buildings, security throughout the district. So it's just going to be the whole gamut. And it will be part of that plan moving forward with updating our safety as well as security with the communication. On the videos, the digital recorders for the buses, we are losing the ability to record activity on the buses daily. About 50 or 60 of our buses still have the VCRs. Everybody knows what that is. The tapes are falling apart.
Why are you looking at me?
That was the camera I was looking at.
Mike, I don't know what a VCR is.
So, I mean, and you talk about safety, security, liability.
Yeah.
You know, activities that occur on the bus with the students. You know, there's many occasions over the last year, especially the last few months, that we've had to go through the tape and, well, tape didn't work. The mechanics, the drivers, they check the tape, the light's on, like it's working and functioning. They go to pull it, it's not functioning. So I've been looking at upgrading that to digital recorders. Both of these items are going to be costly. We may want to look at doing it over a couple-year period, maybe pay a few extra dollars for leasing them. So we can pay in 3 budget cycles. And of course, we talked about taking money out of the reserve because of the severity of these issues and the need around the security. But again, I anticipated getting everything before Friday. I do have a couple of proposals. It's not complete, so I didn't want to bring it out here and say, oh, well, understand that I will at the next meeting. I will be. You're getting way in advance for review, and I will give you a dissertation on the recommendation, and we'll move forward as quickly as we can because this is an immediate issue in my estimation.
Any questions?
One question for Mike. The IU is very happy with the system that they adopted over a year ago. I think it's called Zonar. It's about bus tracking logistics. I don't know if it also has the element of camera, but if you're looking at a significant cost already, you might just want to make sure that you check with the IU about their experience.
Okay, I will do that.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Hearing none. Any public comment? Seeing no hands. Basic summary is that Mike will be coming back with the actual bid information and everything for be considered for a vote. We're down to that point in the agenda. Public will be heard on non-agenda items. Anybody want to address non-agenda items? Seeing no hands. I have one piece that I was remiss on earlier this evening, and that was during the special meeting, and I should cover that. We have given this to the press already, and that is to note, when we talked about the contracts and the agreements, I need you to be aware that the process started back in January with the committee of the board, and we met with various groups to discuss their contracts for coming to expire sometime mid-year, anywhere from June 30th on through the beginning of September. We've worked with, and as of tonight, we had 2 groups that we could approve. One was the bus drivers, and the other ended up being the Act 93 group. Both of these groups helped the financial situation during the past 2 years by agreeing to pay increases and other concessions. Consideration of those past 2 years, and then starting our discussion, we found the discussions to be very congenial and understanding of our current environment. In both cases, we have agreements that we believe are good for both parties under the circumstances. As the Act 93 statement indicates, there is an interim understanding until the final agreement is approved. In both cases, the conditions are retroactive to the expiration of the current agreement and continues for 3 years until June 30th. Probably some highlights end up being that the annual, and these are net increases, are 1.4% on the bus drivers, 2.1% on Act 93. The medical benefit concessions, the increase in their per pay contribution for the bus drivers was $1 per pay for all 3 years. For the Act 93 people is $5 per pay each of the 3 years. So that adds on at the end for the bus drivers $3, for the administrators $15. More importantly, something that didn't exist previously was a medical deductible. And looking at that very quickly, under the bus drivers, the deductible for a single person is $250 for the year. For two-party, it's $500, and for a family, it's $750. Under the Act 93 comparison, again, remembering Act 93 are administrators, is $250 for the first year, and it goes to $500 the second and third year. For a two-party, it's $500 and $1,000 and $1,000. And for the family, it's $750, $1,500, and $1,500. Doctor visits increased from $20 to $30. And for a prescription deductible, currently there's nothing. And for the Act 93, it's increased to $100 per contract year. As we looked at that, the total cost, as we looked at the bus drivers, is about $48,000. That's the estimated cost at this point in time, over the 3 years of the contract. And that's for a total of 92 employees. In the case of the Act 93, it's $267,000, and that's for 65 employees, again, for all 3 years of the contract. So, just want to put that a little bit in perspective out there when you consider what the rates, the increases are, the concessions that were made and everything. And I think we can't forget the fact that these are two groups, and we'll talk about some of the other groups in future meetings, that have made concessions the last 2 years of taking freezes, along with some other items. So, I thank you for indulging me for a few extra minutes. With that, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.